All right. Wow, that is really deep. The welcome is felt in full effect. I know we're all virtual, but it's definitely the love is felt, the solidarity, the justice in this Zoom room, and also throughout the congregation, I think is powerful. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to be in community with you all this morning. I have some treats. We're going to open up, and I think it kind of will be a little interesting. I'm not sure, maybe Father Chris has possibly seen this photo before, but I want to share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I like to start all the time with the origin story. You may recognize these two or these three, including me with the little arrow there. These two wonderful people met at the Logan Square Boys and Girls Club back in the 70s. And the concept of social responsibility was something that was deeply instilled in me at a very early age. And I don't know if my parents were trying to be intentional about it, but it's like the air we breathe in terms of the environment and the context I grew up in. And so for me, community is family. There really isn't a distinction between the two, because in all that time that we spent at the Boys and Girls Club, they met there, and I'm not sure how much they shared with you all. My mom was a photography instructor. My dad managed the gym, of all things. And how much of a kind of egalitarian justice person he is. He wanted everybody to win. He didn't believe in competition. And so the kids would get upset because he would try to make it so that everybody was recognized and honored. But I think that's a testament to the type of space that, my parents were building in community, where people were seen, they were heard, they were valued, and they were ultimately affirmed. That's really all that we want in this life. We want to be able to be recognized as full human beings who are able to meet their greatest potential. And it is our job to support each other and accompany each other on that journey. And so, I've got to always pay homage to my parents and the environment that they, whether intentional or not, curated for me to grow up in, because this has a connection to some of the stories that I'm going to share today. And so when I found out, I'm not sure just if any of you have heard of the Maasai traditional greeting. This is a community in East Africa, Kenya, to be exact, that instead of greeting each other with, "Hi, how are you?" the question is, "And how are the children?" And so I have the first piece that I want to share with you all is a short 2-minute video that tells the story of how this came about and what it actually means. And so I'm gonna stop sharing this screen and go to another screen. Is my sound okay so far? Thumbs up? All right. So we're gonna go, and thank you for having the screen sharing option open. Makes everything so easy. All right. All right, I'm gonna go into full screen and hit play for us.
Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors, and how are the children? It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on their children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, all the children are well. Meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young are in place, that Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibilities. All the children are well means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles for existence do not preclude proper caring for their young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with this daily question, and how are the children? I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how the children are thought of or cared about in our own country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of all children in our communities, in our towns, in our states, and in our country. And I wonder if we could truly say without hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well.
All right, let me go back here. So I hope the sound was okay. I got double sound, but I hope you guys were able to hear it all right. Great. This is a story that I always love to start with because I love that kind of concept and tradition of, you know, always centering us on our collective responsibility, the social responsibility, being responsible for each other, because that's essentially what community is and what community building, that business, that process, that work, that life's work and journey is. And, you know, I want to take us into a couple other pieces. So let me get back to sharing some thoughts, my screen again. Hold on one second here. All right. So the reason why this story particularly resonates with me is because it essentially speaks to this concept that relationships matter, right? And they matter so much, and particularly, you know, when we're thinking about children and young people, they learn in the context of relationships. They discover things about themselves, and they also get introduced to the world around them through relationships. And what's so powerful about that particular story is that it doesn't even matter if you have your own children. The concept is that children and young people are considered a valuable asset in our society because they represent a barometer of community well-being. Because if the children are well, the young people are well, therefore their parents are well, their caregivers are well, the environment is clean, it's safe for folks to explore. And essentially this, what you see here in terms of this image, we talk about this all the time at my former employer at Erickson Institute, organization focused on child development. There's what you call the Bronfenbrenner Ecology of Systems theory. And you can see right there in the middle is, you know, the baby, the child, the young adult, and you see all the influences around them and how you have influences such as obviously whoever is caring for you, whether that's your parent, your guardian, the relationship between you and them, the relationship within the family within the context of where the child or the young person lives, the community. You also have influences from school, from culture, from peers. And then you have broader, influences such as the town, the city, the municipality, or even the national, global, economic, social conditions. All of that influences development and how you see yourself in the world, where you see yourself in the world, how you value yourself. And, it really goes to show how significant relationships are and how young children develop, how young people develop, but also the reciprocal nature, right? The intergenerational piece. Ultimately we want spaces where children and young people can be affirmed and can be valued and can be lifted up in so many ways. And this is going back to the space that I was brought up in at the club, where young people mattered. And it didn't matter whether you were an artist, whether you were into sports, whether you were involved in a street organization. The community that was curated at the Boys and Girls Club there was really to reinforce that you matter and that you have a place in this world. And, relationships kind of took form in so many different ways. And I want to, particularly reflect today, as we're thinking about community and chaos, either or. And I want to talk about our city because there's a lot that we can definitely reflect on in ways that, don't necessarily make us feel good about the conditions and what's going on. I know it was referenced that the shooting of the 1-year-old and the road rage. And I want to, give you all a snapshot of our city here. And so as you can see, the borders in the city represent the 77 community areas that make up Chicago. And the areas that are shaded represent where we have had more than 4 homicides in each community area. And that's the median for 2020. We have experienced an interesting trend over the past few years. When we started to look at this data at Erickson, we were looking at starting like in 2016. And we know that 2016 was an incredibly challenging year because that was the year that Laquan McDonald was murdered. And, as a result, there were quite a few murders in that year that had not been seen for the past 20 plus years. And thereafter, there was a trend that, the murders were actually going down. But what was really interesting is in the past year, during the pandemic, we've actually had another uptick. The reason why I'm bringing this up is, going back to what happens when we experience our environment, and particularly when our environments have challenges in them, such as community violence, and thinking about those root causes, but thinking about the impact that community violence has on community members, and particularly young people, and particularly young children. There's a concept that we talk about in early childhood called toxic stress. And what that means is that stress is sometimes good for a developing brain and a developing young person, but when it's constant and chronic, it becomes toxic. It puts an additional stressor in your body, because what you have to think about is that the part of the brain that registers memory and comprehension and cognition, for learning, is the same part of the brain that registers stress. And when you have a constant trigger, your brain and your body is in a mode where you are always in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so what you see here across our city is we have a lot of areas where they're experiencing homicides, and not just homicides, but shootings. And what's really important to understand, because oftentimes people just limit this to the individual who was the shooter and the one who was the recipient. But we have to think about the broader context of the environment, going back to that Bronfenbrenner picture, right? And the relationships and how the environment influences development. And when we have the constant threat of violence, what that does in terms of how that does limit our ability to interact with our environment, to build relationships, to create spaces and places that are actually serve as buffers or operate in ways that mitigate the stress. But I also don't want us to think about this being all, doom and gloom, because what's been so interesting in this past year particularly is that while we have had a significant number of homicides and we've had a significant uprising around racial injustice, we've also seen some significant work around mutual aid and around community building. And primarily what's happening right here at St. Martin's is a great case study where you are bringing folks together from across the city or even, from other parts of the state and neighboring suburbs to say, we reject the notion that we are separate and that we cannot connect during this period. You all have found ways to stay and remain in community and to show up for each other. And this concept of mutual aid is actually not new to our communities. This has been something that has happened since the beginning of time. And, particularly in communities of color, you see this happening from the very early days prior to colonization. Part of it is really, the collective imagination that we have about ourselves. We rarely think about ourselves as individuals. We think of ourselves as our extended family and kin. And that's why community in many ways can be kin. And so I really want to emphasize, and I think what's important moving forward is for us to strengthen our commitment to transforming our communities, to lifting up what is good and what is working for us, but also to reject the narratives that have been so cemented in so many ways in the media, in, talking heads, where you think about a particular community area and you already have an impression of what it is. And you have some limitations about who you think lives there and what their worth is and what their contributions are and what their values are. And my understanding in terms of the work and just even like watching the video and also hearing everybody's amazing testimony today is that you all are embodying that work. You all have invited and created a space for people to use the church, whether or not they are members, to find shelter there, to build relationships, to have rebuffers and protective factors built there, intergenerational relationships. That is a model to continue to build on, to reject the master narrative that our communities are helpless and that we are chaotic and that we don't have a plan and that we need to come in so many different ways to dispel those particular myths. And so I really want to lift that up because as we move forward, and particularly this past week being especially heavy with the reminder of just, where people are at and that 1-year-old who was shot and is, holding on to his life, there is a power in relationships. There is a power in community building. And I really want to, continue to make sure that we invest in our young people and we invest in our children, because going back to that and how are the children is when we invest in the children, when we invest in young people, and particularly lifting up the relationships, all of them, whether it's the child and the caregiver and wrapping around those folks, whether it's the intergenerational relationship, it's in that where the power is of the community. And so what I want to kind of close us out with in terms of a call to action, because your story and your voice matters. And in the policy space, I always talk about, I don't even know who coined this phrase, but I do know who's added on to it over the years. But, you know, you need to have a seat at the table so that you're not on the menu. And, you know, Shirley Chisholm, who was the first Black woman to run for president, and she said, and if they don't have a seat for you, you need to bring that folding chair and put it up at that table. So it's really about ensuring and demanding that you have a space and a place, because otherwise things will be done on your behalf. And we're not quite sure about the intentions, but this is very much a movement in terms of the policy space. And that's why I'm really excited to be in the position I am in, because I consider myself a purposeful disruptor. I'm about disrupting status quo. I really do not have a problem being that voice at the table that asks 1,000 questions and makes sure that we are examining things from multiple corners, that we are asking ourselves, who are we speaking on behalf of? Have we checked in with those people? Have we invited them to the table? Have we brought them here so that we are not talking pieces? Have we asked ourselves, in what way are we upholding the status quo, or what I call the three-headed monster: white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism? I have no problem naming those as root causes in the problems that we face within our society, because they are harmful to both those individuals who are on the receiving end and the individuals who are imposing it. There is a problem on both ends, and that's why we need to fashion policy where it is about centering our shared humanity, ensuring that we all have a path and the possibility to live up to our greatest potential. And the reason why I wanted to close with this is because there's an opportunity for you all to raise your voice. And there's a website I've shared here, and I'm going to actually take us there, because I understand that there were some questions that folks had wanted me to respond to with respect to the census. And I'm not sure if folks had questions about redistricting, but I want to kind of draw the connections between the two. And then we can open it up to any questions. Oops, sorry. We can open it up to any questions or comments. The Illinois General Assembly has been tasked with a process known as redistricting. And redistricting is when we basically, every 10 years, we take the census data or whatever best data is available to figure out how we are going to draw the boundaries of our legislative districts. This happens at the congressional level, it happens at the state level for both the Senate and the House, and then it also happens at the city level for the wards or, you know, other municipalities outside of Chicago. And so I want to make sure you all know about this process, because we're in a period right now where both the Senate and the House is conducting public hearings to hear directly from constituents, community residents, stakeholders, advocates, to inform us about what considerations must we keep in mind as we are drawing these maps. This is our constitutional responsibility as General Assembly members to draw a map by June 30th so that it can then go through a process of being ratified, and then we can move into the next cycle. And so this is where the census comes in, and this is where you're probably hearing some noise around this. As you all know, we had a delay in our census. There were quite a few distractions throughout the process, One of them being the pandemic, of course, because, you know, in many ways that we have typically gone out and been able to ensure that communities are counted, which is like a door-to-door campaign that got kind of squashed because of the pandemic. But we also had an administration that was trying to limit participation in the census by either changing the deadline or imposing what we call chilling effect, in which they were saying that people would have to disclose if they were a citizenship or not, or if they were a citizen or not. And obviously all the fear around individuals who are not documented and not sure that if they were to respond, that it would then put a mark on them. And so with all those distractions, we were not able to obviously get out in the way that we wanted to. And we're now in the process, the federal government, of validating the census results, checking them against some other sources that the census puts out in a shorter time frame, known as the American Community Survey, and then bringing that data back to government officials to be able to draw the maps. And basically what's being told to us is that the earliest we would get the census data back to do this job is in September. Well, that's obviously past the deadline for our constitutional responsibility to draw maps. So we're in the process right now of listening to the people about what other data sources should we consult. What's on the table is the American Community Survey, which is a survey that gets put out of a sampling of the United States. So that, and it comes out every few years, and that usually kind of gives you a picture of where you're at. Of course, definitely not as accurate. We always have the issue of undercount with particular communities, and but either way, what we want to make sure is that we have a public participation process where folks can weigh in. And so what I want to make sure you all are aware of, and what I'll show you, is the redistricting website. And there's actually going to be, so here's the redistricting website. It was on the slide. It's ilsenateredistricting.com. I'll put it in the chat so that you all have an opportunity to look it up yourself. But on here, you can now draw your own map. So as a community, you all can go into the portal and say, here's where I think the borders of this community should be. In one of the hearings I just participated in, we had members of the Puerto Rican community, members of the Asian Pacific Islander community, members of the Muslim community, and members of the Jewish Orthodox community. And this is for the northwest side of Chicago. And they, in their testimony, because you can provide both oral testimony and you could submit written testimony, they told their stories of their communities. This is why I'm talking about stories matter. And they each talked about how their communities were formed over the various generations, but ultimately the fear of displacement and lack of representation that truly represents their priorities and needs. It was so interesting that while you have these very diverse lived experiences, you also have a common theme of concern around displacement and lack of representation. But it was a very powerful narrative for us to hear, and we encourage your input in this process. And so what I want you all to know is that actually there's going to be a hearing on next Friday, April 16th, at Malcolm X College. You can participate virtually or you can go in person. And this is the listing here that I'm going through of all the hearings, but I wanted to make sure that you all knew, so that on April 16th at 3 p.m., there is going to be a hearing specific to the west side of Chicago and West Cook County. And you can either log in and watch this, or you can participate in person. And it's going to specifically be on the boundaries of both of the three Illinois congressional, legislative, and representative districts. So both the state and the federal. And so this is really an opportunity for you all to make your voices heard, to talk about, because I know one of the things with Austin that can be kind of concerning is, like, at the city level, you have multiple aldermen that serve your community area. And that becomes very difficult to do your work around advocacy, because sometimes, and I've seen it play out, and it even happens in the General Assembly as well, people say, well, that's not my part of the community. That's so-and-so's part. They want to deflect and, you know, put that off on somebody else. And really, when we think about it, we want to be able to have less people we have to push who are going to point the finger at each other. And so those are the types of things that you may want to raise, because, for example, in the hearing that we had on Thursday, one of the folks who testified specifically from the Jewish Orthodox community had said that the House district, the border between the two House representatives, went right through their community. And so now they're split in terms of who they have to talk to for what. And so again, it doesn't make government or advocacy easy. It actually imposes additional barriers. And so I wanted to make sure you knew that. The other thing I wanted to make sure you knew is your elected officials. So Danny Davis, Congressman Davis, is your congressional. And I want to make sure you know about this because, and I don't have this information. I only have it for Congressman Garcia because he's my congressman. But with the federal relief money, communities are going to receive, or each congressional member has what they call member initiatives, and they're community projects that you can propose directly. You as St. Martin can file a proposal for a specific project that is about community building, that is about bringing resources to your community. And so I'm going to at least share with my parents Congressman Garcia's information so that when you guys have an opportunity to check in with Congressman Davis, you can ask him what is the process, because I understand that the application period is open right now, and I want to make sure you all have an opportunity again to put your ideas forward so you can get the investments that you are entitled to. We pay for these investments. They should be coming back to us. The next thing I want to just highlight is your Senate representative is the Senate president, President Harmon. He represents parts of Oak Park as well as Austin. He's the person that you all would be contacting, and he will actually be at that hearing on Friday. So it's really important that you make sure you know who he is, how to get in contact with him, and that you continue to lift up your issues, your priorities, your needs so he can be responsive. On the House side, you have Representative Camille Lilly. And I'm not sure how much you all have been following Representative Lilly. She's a member of the Black Caucus, and the Black Caucus has put forth an amazing set of legislative vehicles that just finally all passed over the past couple months that really were in response to the racial injustice uprising and just the historic systemic racism that we have experienced in this country and particularly in Illinois. They focused on 4 areas: economic opportunity, education, health, and criminal justice reform. Together, these are the most transformative pieces of legislation we have seen in decades. We are the first in the country to put forth such comprehensive package that really gets at root causes of all of these areas that have produced so much harm on communities that have been historically marginalized since the beginning of time. I encourage you to reach out to them to get a briefing on how you can take advantage of these opportunities, because there's I mean, like just the education bill alone, which I reviewed very closely and worked closely with Leader Lightford on, that bill alone was like 500 pages. The criminal justice reform bill was 700 pages, but they can be boiled down to some really clear ideas about what's going to be happening. And why I bring this up to you is because passing a bill is not enough. It's the implementation and the fidelity of the implementation that matters. And that's really where you all come in, so that you can help the sponsors of these bills actually achieve what they intended to when they wrote the bill and passed the bill. So I'm going to close right there. I think I've given you all enough to think about. I'm happy to entertain any questions or comments. And I thank you once again for inviting me to be a part of the, not only prayer breakfast, but a part of the St. Martin's community. I truly value and thank you all for loving my parents, for finding family members in them, and them finding family members in you, and for taking care of them. I mean, I obviously can't be up under them all the time, but they feel they feel incredibly loved, valued, and seen in this space. And I thank you for providing that for them.
Thank you so much, Senator. Excellent.
Amen. All right.
Amen, amen, amen.
Amen, amen.
Yes.
A lot of information.
Yes. Do you guys have any questions for the senator?
Oh God, where do we start?
Yes. I wrote down a lot, but where do I start?
I will say that mentioning Camille Lilly, she was directly responsible for including St. Martin's in the controversial Loretto Hospital, but she reached out to us to get our church members vaccinated. So we're very grateful for Camille Lilly. And
I want to go ahead, Father Chris. I'm sorry.
I just want to thank you, State Senator, for a wonderful presentation. And I really appreciate, in that spirit of King, I mean, Dr. King talked about the three evils of racism, militarism, and capitalism. And I love your three-headed monster of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism, saying it out loud. How can we, as a small church with a big heart, respond to be a disruptor? I love your disruptive
Purposeful
element.
disruptor. Yeah, I mean, I think, what's beautiful about your space is that you have, individuals coming from various corners of the city and outside of the city and representing different lived experiences. And, I think the more and more that you all talk in very discrete terms about the root causes of what you all are specifically trying to transform, it helps. I know some people, still clutch their pearls when I talk about white supremacy. I had to explain at the State Board of Education, because I would name it all the time in terms of how it was manifesting in the system. And I said, look, y'all, I'm not talking about the Klan. I'm not talking about hoods. I'm talking about a system that is designed to ensure that some people have greater access than others and undermine everyone's opportunity to live up to their greatest potential. And because there's a great, Edgar Villanueva wrote this book called Decolonizing Wealth. And he talks about it in the metaphor of a virus. We have all been infected by this virus of colonization, which has been carried out through slavery, which has been carried out through capitalism and patriarchy. And so, because we've been infected with this virus, we have to undergo a process of unlearning, because we have been, in many ways, told how to think, how to act, what beauty looks like, what intelligence should be, what knowledge is valued, without ever questioning, why does it only come out in one particular way? Mm-hmm. And why is it always centered on whiteness? And it doesn't mean that, it's not to condemn people who get privilege, obviously, for being white. I mean, in many ways, I can say a lot of what I say because I can present as white. I know if I looked different, I probably wouldn't get away with a lot of what I say. People get,
Come on now,
I mean,
preacher.
coming to these tables, people think I'm gonna just sit there and be quiet, and I'm like, y'all messed up. You let the wrong person in because I'm going to bring it each and every time because you don't expect it from me. I get it because of age. I get it because of my gender. I get it because if people think I am of a culture or race that is not white, all of those things kind of come together. But I also understand that I didn't get to where I was at by just being quiet. I also didn't get to where I'm at because on my own. It's because other people have disrupted in order for me to get into these spaces. And I have to do the same so that we can really have a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, where everybody's humanity is affirmed. And we just have so many manifestations or barriers and challenges that have been constructed that we just have to begin to transform, but we have to be precise in how we name it. Because if we dance around it and if we don't want to make people upset, we're just going to continue to get the same outcomes that we always will. And we'll just have a little bit of incrementalism here and there. But, you know, I've been telling people in the Senate, I didn't come here to do small things. I came here to do big things. And I'm going to be in this seat as if it were my last day every day.
I know that's right.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Righty.
Yeah. Yes.
Love-
I wanted to ask you, Senator, in terms of how you see your life, do you see your life being in the seat that you are in, or do you see yourself going to some other level? How do you see yourself as you progress? You don't look that old, so you look relatively young, and I know your parents, so I'm wondering if this is where you are, or are you going to some other level?
I will. I don't like to usually, I remember since being younger, people would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do what's your end goal, right? I always talk about, for me, what's important is, it's not so much about the title. It's more about the conditions I can work in, the ability to be creative, and creativity manifests in so many different ways, right? The ability to be transformative and to be with people who are going to support and cultivate that. That doesn't always mean that we're going to always agree. I'm okay with being around people that don't agree with me. In fact, I have a bill right now. All the 4-year universities hate me right now. I was just in a meeting with 14 of them, and they were all coming for me. And the other senator that was
right.
exactly, the other senator that was with me, he said, he's like, wow. He was like, I feel like we're being attacked. I said, no. I said, this is good. This is really, really good. I feel very comfortable in this because this means we are on the brink of change. And
right.
So the point is that for me, if those conditions are present, I'm good. It doesn't matter what position I'm in, right? I'm going to always do this work, whether I'm senator, whether I'm not. It doesn't matter to me as long as I can have the opportunity to affect change at a systemic level in a massive way that is going to affirm people's humanity and lived experience. I'm good.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Being a union leader, I know you really rocked their world when you came up against them. They thought maybe you were going to be on the other side in the dark world, as union people call it. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question. Actually, it's about the Senate. Now that Madigan is no longer there, how is the power shifted, or has it reconsolidated elsewhere?
So it's kind of hard to tell. I mean, there are, and this is more in the House, right? Because he was the Speaker of the House for 30 plus years. And I'm hearing that the House is, shook because of that. But at the same time, what's, I think amazing and demonstrative of the times and the change is we now have Speaker Welch. She is the first Black speaker. And, you know, he also has a track record of some pretty progressive legislation. And so you do have some individuals within the House that, you know, have some close allegiances to the original speaker. And I think there are some things that are playing out. But I'm not totally privy to it because we're in a whole nother chamber. I mean, we operate, it's interesting, even though like we're a part of the General Assembly, we do operate very differently. There is a different culture. I mean, I'm just getting used to the culture of being a legislator, you know, because being an advocate and being an activist, there's different levers that you pull to advance change, right? Whereas, you know, I'm hearing within the General Assembly, it's a little bit more subdued, it's more behind the scenes. And I'm like, no, we need transparency. Let's bring all this out to the public. Everybody needs to see this. And so that might actually be also another point of tension, right? Because the former speaker worked very much, held his, you know, cards close to the chest. You know, things did not move unless he gave, you know, a head nod, and that was it. So, I mean, we'll kind of see. I mean, there's some really interesting legislation that's coming out of the House right now that I wonder would have, because what I'm learning is that while you have legislators that may introduce legislation, you know, that is XYZ, progressive, not progressive, it really is up to the leadership of that chamber if that legislation moves. Your bills can get held in assignments, which is the place that they go after you introduce it formally, and it can never get assigned to a committee, so it won't get even heard by the committee to then move along to have a floor vote. Your bills can get hijacked. Somebody can snatch your bill while it's in process, use it as another vehicle to push what they want to push. Or you can get out of committee and your bill will never come up for a floor vote. So there's so many different ways that power is exercised. And, you know, I know that the former speaker did a lot of that, where, you know, certain bills would never see the light of day. They would go into assignments or the rules committee. I think it's rules in the House. For us, it's assignments. And, or they would never get posted. They get assigned to a committee, but you won't get a hearing. So, I mean, it's really interesting shenanigans that happen in there that you just have to kind of pay close attention to. But it requires you to, you know, be on your toes, but also going back to that relationships piece, to have good relationships with people. That doesn't mean that you know, bend over backwards and you don't necessarily stand up or I don't know if you want to say stand up, but that you don't hold your ground. I do think it's important to hold your ground so that people understand that you have some boundaries. There's some stuff that you're not going to tolerate. And so I guess it's TBD to figure out, you know, just how much the power has shifted. Like right now, cosmetically, it looks like it's shifted. I haven't quite figured out substantively.
Thank you.
Thank you. Reverend?
Thanks. Thank you. I just love being able to say State Senator Christina Pacione-Zayas. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm interested in the comment that you made when you were talking about the landmark legislation that's come out that was advocated by the Black Caucus. And you said that it's good and it's historic, but the issue is fidelity and implementation. So I believe in this old saying that democracy is not a spectator sport. So when we are looking at St. Martin's and other congregations, how can religious congregations be active to make sure that this historic legislation is implemented, taking into consideration the fact that, you know, we're supposed to be, there's this Chinese wall between religious institutions and politics. So how can we best do that? How can we best assure that there's fidelity in implementation?
Well, I mean, I think the way, one, legislators do not ignore faith-based groups, because ultimately faith-based groups are voters, right? And if they're not voters, they're stakeholders in some other sense, right? And I think one of the concrete ways, just to give you an example, so in the health pillar, there was a bill that was passed. It was called Hospital and Healthcare Transformation. And what it proposes is that there be $60 million of the state general revenue funds be drawn down over the next 5 years to unlock $90 million of federal funds for communities who have been ravaged by COVID and other systemic inequities in health, to design community-driven interventions to address the social determinants of health. And the social determinants of health, for folks who don't know, have everything to do with the environment we live in, the air that we breathe, the housing stock that we have access to, education, access to health care, systemic racism, all of these issues, your employment and the stability in your employment, all those issues contribute to your health and wellness. And so what this specific bill is doing is creating a grant-making process in which hospitals have to partner with community-based organizations and other entities in the community to design specific interventions, whether that be, you know, a free health clinic that pops up around the community to get, you know, certain members that typically don't have access, whether that be to have a mental wellness program that's culturally responsive, whether that be to have health promoters that go door to door to check on people and get them connected. The point is that you have a ton of opportunity and latitude to design a community-specific program to address these root causes. And so that could be one way that you all can get together if you identify health as a priority area. And, you know, thinking about Loretto Hospital, they probably are likely to draw down on those funds. And therefore, you need to be at that table to help design that. So that's just one example. There's, in terms of the economic opportunity, there was a piece in there around payday loans, which can be very prevalent in some of our communities because obviously we're not making, you know, oodles of money and we're trying to make ends meet. And so we go to these payday loan lenders and they have charged exorbitant, you know, interest rates in the upwards of like 200%. And so what this bill did, it's not totally desirable, but it is a improvement. It capped the percentage at 36%, which sounds crazy, right? But given that it was at 200%, you know, and so I think what's important is that, again, those payday lenders, you know, stay within those confines. On the education side, there's this piece I really like because this is talking about our youngest children. So early intervention is a state-funded program for infants and toddlers who are experiencing developmental delays. And so children have access, usually at no cost. Families have access at no cost to get, well, one, you can get a free assessment and evaluation on your child if you have concerns about their development between age 0 and age 3. And after that full assessment is completed, a family service plan is developed that may assign speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, developmental therapy, right? And that treatment plan may be, you know, 2 times a week, a one-on-one session with a therapist, so on and so forth. There's been a challenge with the issue of when a child ages out at age 3, and there are still concerns about the child's development because the school district is now supposed to acquire that child's developmental needs by offering them services, even though that child is not old enough to be in a school setting. So what happens is a lot of families lose out on that because, you know, school districts are not really always paying attention to 3-year-olds when they age out. Families, it's a beast to navigate that whole process. I've gone through it. And so what this bill provided for was extending the services past age 3 so that there can be a more seamless transition. So that's one. I actually have a bill right now that is to codify telehealth as a modality for families to access early intervention services. This was something we afforded during the pandemic, and it'll expire once the emergency order is lifted, and therefore some families may lose access. And so there's various things that we have, you know, I mean, I'm telling you, it's a bold bill, but I mean, I also think it wouldn't hurt for you all, especially with your relationship with Representative Lilly, just say, hey, we're really interested in those pillars. Can you let us know what we can be a part of? I mean, you have every right to ask that. And she should be excited that you're coming to her saying, we're here, we want to do something.
Thank you so much, Senator. If anyone has any more questions and you'd like to put them in the chat box, you are welcome to do that for the Senator. We are very gracious, Senator, for you to take out the time in your very busy schedule, because we know you have an extremely busy schedule, and we appreciate you coming by and talking with us and you know, just communing with us and having community with us. We just so thank you so much.
Thank you.